Rome, 54 A.D. Torches flicker along marble columns, their smoke curling like whispers toward the stars. Inside the Golden Hall, 12 emperors and heirs of Rome raise jeweled goblets in a toast that will outlive them all. The tables groan under peacocks glazed in honey, fish stuffed with wine-soaked herbs, and cups of ruby-red Falernian. Every smile hides a secret. Every drink hides a weapon. By morning, half the guests will be dead, their throats seared, their veins burning with unseen fire. Not by sword, not by war, but by supper. The empire that ruled the world would learn that night that power doesn't fall on battlefields. It drowns quietly in its own wine. The feast had been promised as a celebration, a symbol of peace after years of betrayal and blood. The marble halls of the Palatine Hill glowed with gold and oil lamps, the air heavy with perfume and politics. 12 men sat around the table, each believing himself destined for eternity. Yet in Rome, eternity never lasted past dessert. At the head of the table sat Emperor Claudius, weary, pale, and trembling with age. To his right, his young heir Nero, eyes sharp beneath a mask of obedience. To his left, Agrippina, his wife, his niece, and his greatest danger, the woman who smiled when others drank. Senators filled the rest of the seats, men who had bought their titles with blood or gold. Every one of them had killed or betrayed to sit that close to power. Music played softly beneath the murmur of laughter. Servants moved like ghosts, their trays glittering with jeweled cups, silver knives, and dishes laced with invisible death. The kitchens had been locked for days, their doors guarded by Agrippina's hand-picked slaves. Even the tasters had vanished, quietly dismissed that afternoon. Claudius didn't notice. He thought the peace was real. As the first course was served, oysters from Baiae, sprinkled with crushed herbs, a senator leaned to his companion and whispered, "She's smiling again. When she smiles, someone dies." The emperor raised his cup. "To Rome's peace," he said. The others echoed the toast, their goblets clinking like bells for the dead. No one at that table realized they were already drinking their last piece. The empire of masks was about to reveal what lay underneath, and it wasn't humanity. The wine was dark, almost black in the lamplight. Falernian from the emperor's private stores, thick with spice and history. It was said to taste of smoke and sun, of the soil that fed empires. Tonight, it would taste of almonds, faint, sweet, and fatal. Claudius lifted his cup first, the silver trembling in his hand. "To the gods who built Rome," he said. 12 voices echoed the toast, 12 cups raised in unison, 12 futures dissolving into red. The first sip was silence. Then came the laughter, forced, grand, desperate. Every man at that table was performing. Every glance was calculation disguised as courtesy. The poison was subtle, a masterpiece of the imperial apothecaries, brewed to imitate nature itself, slow, polite, untraceable. It began as warmth in the throat, a bloom in the chest, a flush of color in the cheeks. Then came the tightening, the dizziness, the quiet panic behind the smile. The first to fall was Gaius Largus, the physician who'd once cured emperors and killed rivals. He stood to make a toast of his own and never finished the sentence. His knees buckled, his goblet struck the marble, and the room froze. For a moment they thought it was a seizure. For a moment they thought it was chance. Then another man gasped, clutching his throat. Then another. Agrippina did not move. She watched the tremors crawl across the hall with the stillness of a spider. Nero's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. The music faltered, then stopped entirely. Claudius blinked, confused. "What's happening?" he asked. No one answered. The sound of breathing filled the silence, heavy, uneven, terrified. By the time the emperor's question faded, half the cups had been quietly set down, untouched. The others had already begun to die. The air grew thick, not with laughter now, but with fear. Servants froze where they stood, eyes darting toward the exits. The marble walls trapped the sound of breathing and the faint clatter of a fallen spoon. No one dared touch their plates. The musicians' flutes wavered once, then fell silent entirely. Even the torches seemed to dim. Around the golden table, every glance became a threat. Senators shifted their cups farther from reach. One man poured his wine under the table, hoping no one would see. Another leaned close to Nero and whispered, "Who prepared the feast?" Nero didn't answer. He only watched his mother. Agrippina, still and radiant, her fingers tracing the rim of her goblet as if timing the pulse of death. Claudius tried to stand, but his legs trembled. "Enough of this nonsense," he muttered, reaching for his plate of mushrooms, his favorite dish. Agrippina's hand stopped him. "Rest, my lord," she said softly. "Let the food cool." Her voice was calm, almost tender. Claudius smiled weakly, trusting her more than anyone else in the room. It would be the last trust he ever offered. A senator at the far end began to convulse, his body arching violently. The guests recoiled, knocking over plates, spilling wine that steamed faintly against the marble. The smell of roasted meat mingled with something metallic, the unmistakable scent of blood. The feast had turned into a ritual of panic. "Close the doors," Agrippina ordered. The guards obeyed without hesitation. The bolts slid into place with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. There would be no escape. From her seat, Agrippina's eyes swept the room, measuring each trembling face. Somewhere behind her, Nero whispered, "Let them drink their peace." And slowly the empire did. In that moment, Rome's greatest threat wasn't rebellion or war, it was dinner. Behind the laughter and the gold, another room breathed, smaller, darker, and colder. It was here, in the service corridors of the Palatine, that the true feast was being prepared. A woman worked alone, her hands steady, her eyes unreadable. Her name was Locusta, Rome's most infamous poisoner. To the Senate, she was a monster. To emperors, she was indispensable. Before her lay bowls of fruit, jugs of wine, and powders so fine they disappeared into air. She ground roots of aconite, mixed them with honey, and whispered the names of those meant to die. Her poisons didn't kill the same way twice. One mimicked fever, another apoplexy, another sleep so deep the victim never woke. Her art was not death itself but disguise. She had been hired by 3 men this week, all of them powerful, all of them drinking together tonight. None of them knew she'd accepted every contract. When the chief steward entered to collect the final tray, he found her polishing a silver cup. "Do they all share the same fate?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "The same ambition," she said. "Why should the gods favor one poison over another?" Back in the hall, the second course arrived, pheasant glazed in pomegranate. The smell of roasted fruit filled the room, rich and sweet enough to hide the almond trace of cyanide. Agrippina raised her goblet again, eyes shining in the lamplight. "To Rome," she said. Her voice was calm, but her pulse thundered. Behind the curtain, Locusta rinsed her hands and listened. She didn't need to see the feast to know it had begun again. The coughing, the scraping of chairs, the first dull thud of another emperor's head hitting marble. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not to the gods, but to her craft. May every cup find its master. By midnight, the golden hall had become a tomb. The laughter that once filled it was gone, replaced by the wet coughs of dying men and the faint crackle of torches guttering in their sconces. The air shimmered with heat and the scent of spilled wine. Claudius still sat upright, blinking in confusion as though the room had betrayed him. He reached for his goblet again, hands shaking. Agrippina caught it gently, her smile soft, her voice like silk. "You've had enough, my love." Across the table, one of the consuls collapsed face first into a platter of roasted lamb. Another tried to stand, vomited, and slid silently beneath the table. Every sound, the clatter of bronze plates, the scrape of sandals, the whimper of servants, echoed off the marble like thunder in a crypt. Nero watched it all, unmoving. The boy who would soon be emperor leaned back, his eyes reflecting the flicker of torchlight on dying faces. To him, it was education. Agrippina leaned close and whispered, "Now you see, my son, what Rome truly eats." Claudius's lips moved as though in prayer. He tried to speak, but only foam came. The imperial physician rushed forward, a loyal man too foolish to know the game. Agrippina stopped him with one gesture. "Let the emperor rest." The doctor hesitated, then stepped back. One by one, the musicians laid down their instruments. Servants knelt, waiting for orders that would never come. The banquet floor shimmered with a thin film of spilled Falernian, glinting red as blood. Above it all, the marble gods stared down from their alcoves, their stone eyes reflecting the chaos of men who thought themselves divine. At last, the emperor's body slumped forward, his crown tumbling from his head and rolling across the table. It stopped at Nero's hand. He lifted it, looked at it, and said quietly, "The feast is over." But Agrippina smiled faintly. "No," she whispered. "It's only beginning." The dawn came pale and cold, sliding over the marble rooftops of the Palatine like a blade. Inside the banquet hall, the torches had burned to ash. The gold plates were overturned, the goblets empty. The scent of roses, once meant to perfume the air, now mingled with the stench of death. 12 seats had been filled the night before. Only 6 remained occupied, none of them by the living. Servants crept in barefoot, silent as thieves. They carried buckets of water and linen cloths, but paused at the doorway, staring at the wreckage of empire. Senators slumped against pillars, their togas soaked in dark wine. A general lay sprawled across the floor, a ring of foam frozen on his lips. Even the imperial banners drooped, their scarlet soaked to brown. At the center sat Agrippina, perfectly composed, a statue amid ruin. She had not slept. Her eyes were fixed on the empty throne at the end of the table, Claudius's throne. The emperor's body had already been carried away in the night, wrapped in white silk that could not hide the stains beneath. When the palace physician entered, she greeted him with a smile. "You will tell the Senate," she said, "that the emperor passed peacefully, taken by the gods in his sleep." The physician hesitated, his gaze flicking toward the wine cups stacked neatly beside her. She met his eyes. "You will say it," she repeated, "if you wish to keep breathing." By midday, the city knew. Bells tolled from the Capitoline. Messengers ran through the streets proclaiming that the emperor was dead and that Nero, his noble heir, would take the throne. Crowds gathered in stunned silence as black banners unfurled above the palace. Rome mourned, but beneath the mourning was relief and fear. They did not yet understand that the poison had not ended with Claudius. It had only changed hands. From her balcony, Agrippina watched the smoke rise from the temple fires, her face unreadable. "Now, Rome belongs to my son," she whispered, "and Rome will never stop feeding him." For months after the banquet, Agrippina ruled from behind the throne. The empire bent to her whisper. Senators bowed deeper to her than to her son. Coins were struck with her image beside Nero's. The first time in Roman history, a woman's face shared the emperor's crown. And yet, beneath the marble calm, the same poison that had killed Claudius was still circulating, this time through politics instead of veins. Nero had learned his lesson well. He watched his mother as she had once watched Claudius, smiling, silent, studying how power decayed. Agrippina believed she had built an emperor she could control. She forgot that serpents don't stay tamed once they taste their first kill. It began with whispers. Nero's advisors murmured that Agrippina plotted to replace him with another heir, that she met with senators in secret, that she still commanded the loyalty of the Praetorians. Whether true or not didn't matter. In Rome, suspicion was a death sentence. The young emperor ordered her moved from the palace to a seaside villa at Baiae, under guard, but still gilded. She laughed when the guards saluted her. "My son sends chains wrapped in silk." One evening, a courier arrived with a message sealed in wax. Nero invited her to a private dinner. A reconciliation, he said. The irony wasn't lost on her. Still, she went. The ship that carried her home that night had been designed to collapse at sea. It did, but Agrippina swam to shore. So the emperor tried again. Days later, assassins entered her villa. When the first blow fell, she did not scream. She looked at them calmly, drew back her cloak, and said, "Strike the womb that bore him." And so they did. At dawn, Nero announced to the Senate that his mother had conspired against him and had been executed. The senators cheered. The same men who had bowed to her name now trampled it. But Rome remembered. The woman who had poisoned an empire had been consumed by her own recipe. The teacher killed by the student. The mother undone by the son. And the poison she poured into the empire's veins still flowed. Only now it wore a new face. Years passed, but the poison never left Rome. It simply changed hosts. After Agrippina came Nero's own banquets, darker, louder, stranger. Senators drank because they were watched. Generals toasted because refusal meant death. Every golden cup was a loaded weapon. Every smile hid calculation. The empire that once conquered the world now devoured itself. Nero's feasts ended in fire. The city burned, the Senate fell silent, and the Praetorians whispered of new heirs. Before long, the very men who had raised him to power poisoned him too. His final words, they said, were almost a confession. "What an artist dies in me." But the poison kept working long after his heart stopped. One emperor after another, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, Domitian, all rose on treachery and fell the same way. In the end, it wasn't armies or invasions that hollowed Rome. It was dinner tables and whispers and goblets raised to absent gods. When archaeologists uncovered the Palatine centuries later, they found flakes of gold leaf fused with traces of arsenic in the cracks of the banquet hall. History had recorded the feast in ink, but the walls still remembered in chemistry. And so the story ends where it began, under the glow of torches, wine glinting red, a table surrounded by men who mistake survival for victory. 12 emperors, 50 rivals, one night that never ended, because Rome wasn't destroyed by enemies. It was eaten from within, one banquet at a time. If you want more stories where empires collapse in whispers, where power tastes like poison, subscribe. History remembers the battles. We remember the tables where they began.